Hello and welcome to this Church Militant special coverage of the Washington, D.C. press conference aimed at defunding the U.S. bishops, cutting off their access to U.S. tax dollars, coming to you live from our studios here in Detroit and on the ground at the National Press Club in Washington. I'm your host, Brad Eli. And joining me here today is Church Militant's very own Simon Ray. Simon, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Well, thank you very much, Brad. Yes, it was a combination of two events that brought this event to a head. The first was the so-called apostolic visitation carried out against Bishop Strickland down there in Tyler, Texas. Now, most interestingly, it was Bishop Kikanis who was one of the bishops who was sent there. You may remember Bishop Kikanis. He is a notorious bishop who is responsible for greenlighting the ordination of the worst sexual predator in the history of the Chicago Archdiocese. And Strickland, of course, well, he is a political conservative who is well known for his comments on Twitter, which have riled the feathers of the liberal establishment.
So the first was this, as you were saying, the apostolic visitation, Bishop Joseph Strickland in Tyler, Texas, and the extremely liberal Democrat, loving retired Bishop of Tucson, Arizona, Gerald Kikanis. And as we know, the notorious bishop who greenlighted the ordination of the worst serial predator in the history of the Chicago Archdiocese. Strickland's a political conservative and often tweets opinions and musings that would anger the high-ranking liberal bishops here in the U.S. Now, the second event, which dovetails into the Bishop Strickland news, was the release of the wonderfully done movie, Sound of Freedom, focusing on the horrendous issue of child sex trafficking. That filthy crime is able to happen precisely because the borders are totally porous, and that is the case because of the Democrat Party. And here's the point: the complicity of the U.S. hierarchy getting billions in taxpayer dollars to promote those illegal immigration policies. I just can't say enough, Simon, about the role of the bishops acting as the NGO. Something like $3 billion have gone through Catholic organizations since 2008. I don't think many people are aware of this, but the budget, the annual budget for the USCCB is somewhere around $200 million. Well over half of that's from the U.S. government. And so when you're talking about, well, I'm going to withhold my $5, I'm going to show those bishops what's going on, well, the U.S. government just keeps overriding that.
Well, it's an interesting situation. I mean, certainly with regard to the money coming in, obviously they're using that money for these, charitable initiatives, a lot of which are related to immigration. Of course, the great concern is not so much that they're using this money for immigration, because obviously, fine, there are a whole bunch of legitimate things that one could do to help immigrants. Certainly, it's a teaching of the church that we must welcome the immigrant, welcome the stranger. But it's the question of what they're doing and how they're doing it. They're behaving in this anti-American way. As you mentioned, Brad, the borders are just completely porous. The immigrants are coming in, and they're not even really immigrants at this point. I don't think that's a fair description at this point. I'm an immigrant. Christine Niles is an immigrant. There are various people who come in who are immigrants. These people are lawbreakers. They're just coming across the border without any respecting of the laws of the country. They're also, many of them are coming in, and they're not coming here for good purposes. It's obviously Donald Trump, was vilified for saying they're not sending their best, at that point. But to be perfectly honest, I don't know if anyone's sending people, but there are certainly some of those people who are coming over who are not the best, unless you are judging best to be cartel members, drug dealers, and that sort of stuff. We have the fentanyl crisis in this country, where fentanyl is coming across the border. We have the crisis where the cartels, Mexico, a lot of people are coming into this country from Mexico across the Rio Grande. Mexico is arguably a failed state because of the existence of the cartels. There are areas in Mexico which are effectively controlled by the cartels. Government has broken down. These cartels are now coming in, bringing their criminality, bringing their drugs, bringing this kind of behavior into the United States. Nothing is being done at the border to stop it. Now, the bishops are not saying, well, we're going to use this money that we've got for immigration to maybe argue to make it better that, better vetting of people at the border, make it better for people who are coming in as refugees at the border. That's not. It's just being used essentially just blanket, just bring people in, the border should be open, and these are absolutely massive problems that are striking right to the heart of really the identity of America. You know, Dave Gordon's said this before, that kind of the identity of a country is predicated on the notion of it having borders. Here is where the country is, and outside is where the country is not.
A couple things going on here. We're also not only talking about defunding the bishops in the sense of not all the U.S. bishops, but the USCCB specifically, because it's this organization that's taking in hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars over the years, and we don't know where the money's going to. So at least have them start filing the 990 form. Who's being hired? Where's the money being spent? We have no idea, no accountability, no transparency. And if there's anything we learned from 2018 and the summer of shame, is accountability. And without transparency, there is no accountability. So we're going to have that 990 formed and really put the screws to the USCCB. Less than an hour ago, a prayer rally in front of the USCCB headquarters in D.C. concluded, which was part of the day's events. About a dozen participants showed up to pray for the bishops to right the ship, to stop misrepresenting Catholic teaching, and stop supporting the political agenda of the party of death. Again, the bishops have been awarded billions of taxpayer dollars over the years. So here you see the signs people have about defunding the bishops, and the bishops being Democrats in robes. These charges have rightly been leveled against the bishops going back decades, almost to the inception of the Bishop Conference in the mid-1960s. Jesse Romero from the Virgin Most Powerful Radio, good friends of the Church Militant, and another of the Deposit of Faith Coalition, led the prayers from 11 o'clock until, as we said, less than an hour ago. Standing by now live in the National Press Club, where the press conference is set to begin in just a few minutes, is our very own Nick Wiley. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Brad, how's it going? It's a beautiful day in D.C. today, unless you are a U.S. bishop. And then in that case, you know, you might be a little worried because, you know, we're going to have some really good speakers out here who are really going to drive the hammer into the secular media about what the bishops are up to. Because as Catholics, we've woken up more and more to the issues that are going on. We see the illegal immigration, how they're helping, the gun control, just the very weird comments they make while never making comments, you know, in defense of the faith or the unborn, anything like that. But all the woke things they'll make comments about, we see it every day because we follow them on Twitter. We see their press releases, all that, and other Catholics we disseminate that information to. But the secular media hasn't seen it that much. That hasn't been the thing. They had the 2002 with the bombshell sex abuse report, all those types of things, like those little, the McCarrick report, those little things. But today we're going to really try to unveil all of the ways in which the U.S. bishops especially are in bed with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I guess there's a few points there. Many Catholics across the country don't know that the bishops are not, as you're talking about, pushing the deposit of faith, talking about faith and morals, and they're really talking about social justice issues. Very much case in point with Cardinal Dolan, Cardinal Supich, Cardinal Tobin asking people to turn in their guns as if that was somehow a moral issue. And these massive millions and even billions of dollars is such a misdirect from them doing what they're supposed to be doing, because they have so much time, you know, busy counting all the beans out there and all the social justice programs. They don't really have time to have this deposit of faith push. So rightly, the Deposit of Faith Coalition is riding herd on this and asking if we can defund the bishops so they get back to being good shepherds of the deposit of faith, teaching that deposit of faith. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and where this whole, just for instance, for example, when I got to the airport yesterday, my Uber driver was telling me about just how dangerous it's been around here, how the gun control has affected everything, because he drives in multiple states and all. In Virginia, you know, he can have a gun. They can have guns there. People have guns. But here in D.C., where, you know, one of the places like Chicago and all, where it has the strictest gun control, and we see all this violent crime and still gun crimes, because as we know, criminals don't care. But it doesn't stop people like the bishops from pushing for things like that instead of pushing for the faith. They're not, one, they don't evangelize, so not bringing people to Jesus to know that, okay, you shouldn't use guns to kill people. And two, they're pushing for the gun control for the people who they're not reforming in the first place, who are just going to still be criminals. And so that's why we went out and we had that prayer rally in front of the USCCB. Let them know, hey guys, we're here praying for you. Had a few people that stepped out to see us. One one man who I think was a bishop who I invited by Bullhorn, who just kind of, ignored me and all. I was like, I said father because I didn't know if he was a priest or a bishop, but I was like, Father, we'd love to have you come pray with us. We're here to pray for you guys. And he just, he was talking to a police officer, but then he just turned away and refused to speak to me. So they obviously weren't very much in the mood to pray today, which is kind of crazy being a man of God.
Yeah, I guess the other aspect there, when they dogmatize things like climate change instead of reigning, the bishops, I'm sorry, are not scientists, so they don't really have a moral authority. Of course, we're not supposed to, rape, pillage, and plunder the environment out there, but my goodness, we have some of the highest standards in the world and far outpacing places like China. So for them to, these policies are actually coming for your gas stoves, Nick. I mean, they don't want you to have a gas stove anymore, or maybe a gas barbecue grill because it's, not efficient, or your car, for crying out loud. So when bishops are getting on board with all this nonsense, really they're acting just like a lobbying body, a lobbying arm of the Democratic Party, and that type of stuff has to be called out, reined in. Somebody was saying they went through the parking lot in 2016, and most of the bumper stickers at the USCCB parking lot were Obama bumper stickers, Obama Biden, So that's something that really has to be checked in. They can't be just an NGO. They have to get back to being shepherds, follow the money trail, let's defund them, get back to teaching the deposit of faith. That's where all this deposit of faith coalition comes in. We want to jettison the social justice issues, stop being a lobbying arm of the Democratic Party, stop taking their money, having your hands tied with what you can and can't say by Supich and other people who are in power at the USCCB, and just get back to preaching the faith, for crying out loud. Simon's here.
Well,
might want to weigh in for a moment.
Before we get to our press conference, which is going to be at...
I'm sorry there, Nick. We got a little everyone talking at once because Brad was talking, which he does very well for a while. I just want to come back to your introduction there, Nick, about saying that you invited a bishop or a priest via Bullhorn. I think that's just a wonderful thing. I think we should probably make more of that there. But we did see, obviously, the shots of the prayer rally there outside the bishop's headquarters, and obviously there were about a dozen people who turned up for it. Were those were people that we had invited? Or was there just happened to be people who were just passing who joined in? Did anyone just pass and kind of ask questions, or is it not that sort of neighborhood?
Yeah, so we had people, we sent out a lot of invites, technically, I guess, by telling people, we're going to have this rally at 11. Please join us if you can. We blasted that everywhere. And so people did show up. And I'm going to bring in Michael Voris now to talk more about that prayer rally we had. We were both there together. And Mike, what were kind of your impressions on the rally?
Well, I thought the rally was, look, it serves a purpose. What do you do? We've touched on the spiritual dynamic already, prayed for the bishops, prayed for the church, that all of this madness end. And now we're switching over to the secular point of view. It's the supernatural and the natural. That's everything we do here at Church Militant. But one thing that I thought was really noteworthy of the four topics that we're covering here today, and then the bishops are sort of undermining the Republic in these four areas. One of them is the whole gun control thing. And not that that's the most important one, because they're not actually, as far as we know, they're not taking actual federal funding or state funding to abolish the Second Amendment. Although knowing this lot, that may well be going on. But I found the hypocrisy of it just overwhelming. So Cardinal Dolan, Cardinal Supich, and Cardinal Tobin all came out within about the last month and said Americans should hand over their guns. That's not saying abolish the Second Amendment, but it is in effect saying having the same effect. So what I found was interesting is while we were there, six sets of armed guards and police and a tactical unit and a helicopter are flying overhead, parked down the street, coming down the driveways, every one of them armed to the teeth, and yet we're supposed to give up our guns. It's once again, it's the hypocrisy of the bishops. That bishops, they obviously knew we were going to be there. They're all sitting, everybody was armed. We've asked for a police permit to, be there. All that was fine. But to talk about you have to give up your guns, and yet these guys walk around with guys armed to the teeth. is just amazing to me. I also wanted to point out that, that place is supposed to be a Catholic place. It's not. It's a political lobbying organization. That's all it is. Has nothing to do with the faith. But it still says the word Catholic there on the great big stone thing in front of it. And so here are faithful Catholics standing there in front of the place praying. One of the guys had his foot just over the sidewalk line, and the guys are, you got to get off the property here. There's no trespassing. I'm like, whoa. This is a Catholic organization with Catholics standing out here praying for you, and yet you're like, get off the property. So, by the way, the property that's paid for by our tax collection, our tax dollars, and our tax, the money that's taxed in the collection basket every Sunday. The hypocrisy is just off the charts.
Yeah, I was the first person to get told that I was trespassing because I went to take a picture of a statue that's out in front, which made me go onto the grass some, and that same man came and was telling me how I was trespassing and needed to get on the sidewalk, and I'm just like, well, I pay the government my taxes, and I, precept of the church, you have to give money to the church. I don't recommend doing it that way to the bishop, so I don't do that anymore, but the money that I've given to them in the past, and so I'm doubly paying for these people because they're making money off the Democratic Party. Right. So I've doubly paid for this property, and I can't even take a step into the grass. I didn't try to go into a building, just on the grass to take a picture of something.
Yeah, what's amazing is that this complex, this building, USCCB headquarters, is a giant thing. I mean, when you drive into the front of it, it looks kind of, somewhat modest. You get back behind the property, and it's a big sprawling complex. They have a multiple $100 million budget every single year. They've got armed security guards all over the place. I mean, it's locked down more than Fort Knox. And you set one foot on a blade of grass there, and they're like, oh, it's like the SWAT team comes after you. And I think it's part of the press conference's goal today is to underline the hypocrisy of all of this, because it really is hypocritical to put crucifixes up on your buildings or inside your offices and statues all over the place and all of this, while at the same time you're undermining the republic and you're not saying a word about the faith, and yet you call yourself Catholic.
So what do you think? You're a secular guy, you don't know any of this stuff. You were to come in here today, what do you think would be the most shocking thing that you expect to hear from one of the speakers? You know what they're talking about, you know their thing. But if you were a secular man, what would be the most surprising thing to you?
That the U.S. bishops and other members of what we want to call the irreligious left are receiving, well, at the end of the day, hundreds of millions of dollars in government funding, and it's not just federal funding. We're concentrating on that in D.C. at this particular press conference, but it's the states, it's the counties, it's the cities. For example, the city of San Antonio awarded Catholic Charities $32 million, I think last month or 2 months ago, $32 million for one project to take care of one house with some illegal immigrants in it as kind of an illegal immigration processing center. $32 million from the city of San Antonio. I mean, these guys are awash in billions of dollars. And I think most people just simply don't realize that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about this before. This probably isn't going to brought up here today, but the insurance company that they have out in Nebraska. Remind us about that for the people who may not have heard that report but are going to be watching our live coverage today about this huge insurance firm they have that's just making billions.
Yeah, well, they force dioceses and priests and religious orders and everybody else to pay into that. If you're a pastor, you have to get your money, you have to get your car insurance from that organization, which is funded by the bishops. It's a self-funded everything, which on paper sounds great, but when you realize there are tens of billions of dollars at play here. This is the U.S. Bishops' Conference. I'll close with this comment. The U.S. Bishops' Conference is the largest, most well-funded enemy of the American Republic that nobody knows they have.
Yeah. Well, they will today. But thank you, Mike.
Get it going. Thanks very much, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, what do you think?
Well, I think it's very, very interesting. Like, obviously, always good to hear from Voris there, and certainly, this entire coalition was Voris's idea. I was there when we first heard the news about Bishop Strickland, which, of course, this event isn't about Bishop Strickland. I think that's a very important thing that everyone's got to realize. This isn't about Bishop Strickland. This is about these much larger issues that we've got there. So it's always wonderful to hear that presented there. But yeah, Voris has had this vision to do this over the last couple of weeks. It's all coming together today. And as you say, they are going to hear about it. Nick, wonderful to hear from you. I'm sure we'll probably hear from you after the press conference itself, which I think is starting in about 10 minutes. So I'll say goodbye to you now.
All right. Bye, guys. See you soon.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think this press conference is going to be very interesting because we have 4 speakers who are going to be talking. It's not just going to be Voris. It's not just going to be like a kind of a vortex in a very expensive ballroom. So we've actually got some, on those 4 issues that we're talking about the climate change issue, the thing there, the issue of the hate speech law, specifically the hate speech law here in Michigan, but also we're going to be talking about, I think, just the hate speech laws in general. Michigan's just where it's starting. Illegal immigration and child trafficking, as we said, of course, within that movie, the Sound of Freedom, which is, I mean, obviously that's a fictional movie, but it's talking about a real thing. And, of course, gun rights. Very interesting. We've got some wonderful people here. We've got Trevor Loudon. Of course, people will recognize him from Epoch Times, very famous there. Global warming realist, he describes himself, you know.
Okay.
So, you know, obviously, and look, I mean, certainly, is the world getting hotter? Certainly seems to be. It certainly seems that we're having these hotter times. But you know what? Is it mankind doing that? Is this a natural process? Whatever. Obviously, a lot of discussion to be had with that. We've got William Wagner, who is president of the Great Lakes Justice Center. So that's here in Michigan, because, you know, if somebody comes along and says Great Lakes, well, that's Michigan, not you, Wisconsin. Sorry, guys. Great Lakes Justice Center is obviously in Michigan, and he's going to be talking about the hate speech law. We've got Sheena Rodriguez, who is the foundress of the Alliance for a Safe Texas. Obviously, Texas deeply impacted by this illegal immigration, a lot of it coming across the border. And finally, we have Zoe Warren, who is a Second Amendment activist, and he's the host of Second Amendment for Today. So he's going to be talking about the gun issue. So we've really got some heavy hitters who are going to be coming and talking at this conference. And hopefully, like the secular media, will set up and take notice.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how well they drive home the point and on those issues, how much open for debate they are. And Niles, we're going to be breaking here for Niles with Trevor Loudon actually standing by. Welcome, Christine Niles and Trevor.
Great to see you. Yes, we have with us Trevor Loudon. He's from New Zealand. He's one of the speakers today, and he's actually going to be talking about man-made climate change. So if you could maybe just summarize for our viewers your concerns about man-made climate change, specifically the Marxist agenda and the anti-Christian agenda of the whole man-made climate change movement.
Yeah, we are told to have dominion over the earth, that we'll have dominion over the fowls, the fish in the sea, and subdue the earth. The whole climate change agenda comes from Marxism and Malthusianism. You know, Marx says that this is historical. This is if some have more, some have less. The Christian message is bounty for all. Apply God's word, do the right thing, and you will enjoy bounty. The Marxist message says no. If you have more, somebody else has less. Somebody must take it from you. Resources are finite. So it stands in complete opposition to the Christian message to go along with this environmental and climate change claptrap.
And is there really any proof of man-made climate change?
No, there isn't. The only climate change I acknowledge is spring, summer, fall, and winter. You know, there is no proof. And there's a famous saying, you know, 95% of scientists agree with whoever's funding them. And that's the story here. There is massive grants going out to people who can bring up some minor evidence of climate change, man-made climate change, and exaggerate it and falsify data to push a narrative. But it's basically a socialist narrative saying that we must stop consumption, we must slow down, we must reduce population to accommodate the environment. That is 100% in opposition to the Christian message.
All right, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you because I know you have to speak soon, but thank you so much for being here, Mr. Loudon. Great to speak with you. God bless you.
Thank you.
All right. And I think we have someone else, MC, Michael Hitchborn, if you want to come up here. Michael Hitchborn, our good friend from the Lepanto Institute. He is actually the MC. You've got to be on soon. But, yeah, why are we here today? What are we doing?
Well, what we're doing is we're letting the USCCB know, and the general population at large, that the Catholic Church, the USCCB, which is not actually the Catholic Church, as Michael pointed out, is financing all of the enemies of the church, they are propagating political agendas that are against the better interest of the United States, of the American people. They're propagating the climate change hoax. They're pushing for open borders. They are actually funding Marxist organizations that are flipping votes throughout the country. So the USCCB is absolutely an enemy, and we are trying to let the people know exactly what is taking place.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Hitch.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We're going to be starting in just a few minutes, but yeah, the crowd is beginning to form here. This is actually a press conference for the media. It's not a conference for the public, although we do have a section for the public to show up. And some of the people from the rally are actually sitting back here. But this is primarily a press conference for the media to ask questions. And a lot of them are, they're mostly secular media who don't know a whole lot about this. So.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful, Christine. I'm just answering emails from people who are asking how they can watch this. And I'm like, it's on live right now. People are emailing me right here to say, but yes, me telling you we're live right now. But yes, we're going to be going live with the press conference very soon. Christine, you were there at the prayer rally, I'm sure, this morning. How did that go? Was that peaceful? Because I was worried. I will be honest. I was worried that this is D.C. I was worried that there was going to be some violence or something kicked off. There were going to be counter-protesters or something like that, the Black Bloc or something like that. I really genuinely was worried.
It actually turned out really well. I'd say we had about 24 people.
Okay.
Yeah, we had about 24 people show up, completely peaceful, but it was really funny because, you had at least two police vans plus an extra security guard armed as if we were like coming there to break down the doors. But all we did, obviously, is we prayed the rosary. Jesse Romero led us in the rosary. Then he played the litany to the precious blood and litany to the Sacred Heart. But it's interesting because we saw people from the second floor of the USCCB peeking out from behind the blinds. And apparently I learned that second floor is called the Bernardine Wing. And then at one point a priest came out. He was either a priest or a bishop. Mm-hmm. But, Nick Wiley, who was just on before, he actually spoke through the bullhorn and said, Father, you're welcome to join us. We would love for you to join us. Of course, he just turned and walked away.
But
it looks like we have about a couple minutes left before this press conference begins. So, exciting day. Yeah, we had a pretty good turnout. And then, interestingly enough, we actually had a fellow come who was running for U.S. Senate, Eddie Garcia. So we are hoping to, later today, we hope to put up a little bit of a soundbite from him. But he's a good Catholic running against Democrat Senator Tim Kaine, fake Catholic pro-abortion. So we had some good people show up today. Yeah,
Tim Kaine, who was nearly vice president, of course, quite famously there, was running with Hillary Clinton. Well, absolutely wonderful, Christine. Obviously, we'll let you get off and do your job there with the press conference, because I know that's starting in just a couple of minutes. Always wonderful to talk to you, Christine.
Okay.
Right. So
we've got
guys. About a minute and a half before.
Mostly peaceful protests today.
Mostly peaceful protests. I think it's
no buildings got burned down.
No buildings got burned down. I was genuinely worried that some Antifa or somebody was going to start something, or the bishops would have, not that the bishops would have come out and like beat somebody with a crozier, but that the bishops may very well have slipped some money to somebody, some of our money, slipped some money to an Antifa crowd to go and throw brickbats or whatever at people and cause that kind of problem, because that's what they do. Obviously, putting the police officers there, that's not for their protection. That's not for their protection. What that is the hope, is if you fill a place with a bunch of guys in black uniforms carrying guns and stuff, somebody is going to get all head up. Somebody's going to shove a police officer, and suddenly you can use this as an excuse. So I'm obviously very glad that it was peaceful and glad that people were peaceful there. But yeah, this is just the left strategy and tactics.
One of the outcomes, a successful outcome here, I would hope that at least some bishops have an opportunity for a moment of pause and start to say, yeah, we spend so much time pushing Democratic Party social justice issues that aren't always Democratic Party, but so oftentimes aligned with the Democrats, of open borders, gun control, climate change to the hilt, even if it breaks the American taxpayer and the American companies in the process. So I would hope that some bishops and priests understand, take a moment to reflect on all the times when they have heard press releases come from the U.S. bishops on social justice issues and not on the deposit of faith. faith, and morals. And we hope that that get rectified.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed, we hope that that is the case. I mean, I think what we kind of need to look at is this idea that some of these individuals, some of these bishops, some of these priests may be kind of stuck at the USCCB. You've got to imagine, I don't know who that priest that Nick saw was, but maybe he's one of these like staffers. He's not, a bishop. He's not something that. What's he doing? He's got a nice cushy job in Washington, D.C. He's got it in a nice town with nice Italian restaurants, all this sort of stuff. He's not hearing a lot of confessions. He doesn't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to say Mass at 5:30 for the people going to work. He doesn't have to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, drive out, hold the hand of a dying woman. He's not a parish priest. He's got quite a cushy job.
Human nature being
priest.
What it is.
Right. And he's going to lose that cushy job if he comes along and he's going to take something else. All right, they are telling me now that we are able to go live now to the presser from Washington, D.C.
All right, let's begin. I would like to introduce to you the founder of St. Michael's Media, Church Militant, Michael Voris, one of the coalition members. Michael will lay the overall theme for you briefly just before we get to the topic of the presentations.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, media, both the dozen or so of you who are online, plus the numbers of you that are here present. The very first thing that I would like to say is the members of the coalition, there's 10 of them, 10 groups, are not opposed to the Catholic Church or the Catholic faith. This is not an attack on the hierarchy. It is nothing of the sort. It is a call back to faithfulness to stop trying to destroy the Republic by taking money, hundreds of millions of dollars. And when you add it all up, it's billions of dollars. The USCCB, although it has the word Catholic in it, is not Catholic in any means, shape, or form. It is a political lobbying arm that the bishops established in the 1960s, and that is the end of it. It has nothing to do with the faith. It has no conference of bishops from whatever country has any official tie to the church beyond the fact that the bishops started it. That's it. That's like saying a bunch of Catholics start a baseball team and somehow the baseball team is Catholic. Has nothing to do with it. It's a political lobbying arm here in the States, and that's all it engages in. It does not express anything about the faith. It has no binding authority when it comes to the faith. No bishop is bound to follow anything that comes out of the USCCB. That is not its role. It's set up as a political lobbying effort. That's why it's here in Washington, D.C., and not in Nebraska or Toledo or anywhere else in the country. So just want to make that very clear. This has nothing. Everyone involved in this effort are loyal sons and daughters of the church. They have no desire whatsoever to attack anything about the church. However, the leaders of the church need to be called to task, and they need to be called to heel. So in addition to the 4 presentations that you will be hearing on 4 specific areas, we want to be very clear that the end goal of the Deposit of Faith Coalition is specifically to defund the bishops and other members of what we'll call the irreligious left. They are receiving billions of dollars of U.S. tax dollars, and they are funneling that back into the Democratic Party's agenda when it comes to the 4 issues you'll be hearing about today: illegal immigration, climate change, the gun control initiatives, the abolishment of the Second Amendment as far as they can take that, as well as the religious hate speech laws. And they are supportive of these either directly or complicitly, and it must come to an end. So again, the Bishops' Conference has no relationship to the church. No matter what they say, they have the word Catholic in it. If there was ever an organization that should have the word Catholic removed from its name, it's the USCCB. It is a political lobbying organization that has a multi-hundred-million-dollar budget every year. That money comes partially from the federal government and partially from a tax that almost no Catholic realizes is paid by their diocese. And the money flow, which is one of the things we'll be talking about today, the money flow goes from the collection basket in your parish, your regular everyday parish, gets paid into the chancery, the diocese or the archdiocese. A portion of that tax, or a portion of that is a levied tax that the bishops agree to that goes to fund the budget of the USCCB. That's the money flow. That's how it works. To show you how in love with money the bishops are, the very first item that was on the bishops' meeting following COVID when they gathered in person, the very first item was to increase the diocesan tax to fund even more the USCCB. And they passed it. Some of them complained, but they passed it. So let's not make any mistake here. We're talking about the temple riches. We are not talking about the faith. So to that end, we are engaged in an effort to spotlight this because virtually nobody who has knowledge of the church and politics has any idea of the amount of money that the U.S. bishops bring in. And it needs to, when it's your money, taxpayer money, needs to be brought to an end. We've included in the media media packet, a particular sheet here that comes, we printed out from the IRS page. There are 3 different things we're trying to accomplish. This would probably be the most likely one. So if the media would like to reference this, or if you've already looked at it, you know what it is. But it is the annual exempt organization return, who must file and who must not. If you are a church and you receive government money, you are exempt from filing anything publicly. What does that mean? That means when you are handed these hundreds of millions of dollars, once it goes to you, there is zero accountability. We have no idea where this money is spent. On their internal audits for the USCCB, that's the KMPG financial house, they do the auditing, they'll put down one line, Immigration Services, $67 million. That's the latest one, or 2 years ago perhaps, can't remember exactly. Here's a great giant number. Well, $67 million to who? For what? Where did it go? Did you buy phones? Did you put people up in hotels? Did you ship people around the country? Who were the organizations you were handing this money to? Are they friends of the bishops? Is there some sort of nepotism thing going on? They're not required to file. That exemption must be removed. It's American tax dollars, and American taxpayers have a right to know where their money is being spent, no matter who it's being given to, as a third-party contractor or a non-government organization. In this case, the U.S. bishops have that organization over there on 4th Street to set up as to be a non-government organization, and that's what they do. We have a right to know. Every other non-government organization has to reveal where they spend their money. Why shouldn't religious ones have to? So that's the theme of all of this. We're going to touch on 4 major areas that the bishops and the irreligious left, of which the bishops are a part of in that body over there at the USCCB, various things that they need to be brought to task on and exposed. And again, we'd like to thank the media for being here and helping begin this very, very important conversation. Thank you very much.
Our first speaker is Trevor Loudon. He is an Epoch Times contributor and global warming realist. Trevor Loudon is an author, filmmaker, and public speaker from New Zealand. For more than 30 years, he has researched the radical left, including Marxist and terrorist movements, and their covert influence on the mainstream politics. He is best known for his book, The Enemies Within: Communists, Socialists, and Progressives in the U.S. Congress, and his similarly themed documentary film, The Enemies Within. He'll be speaking on the topic of man-made climate change hoax. Various spotlights of his talk will include the Marxist roots of climate change movement, the anti-Catholic ethos of the climate change movement, Malthus Reborn, and where will climate change politics take us? Trevor?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thanks to the organisers of the event. I'll start with Genesis 1:28, from Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Now, I think any Christian would take from that man's role is dominion over nature, that nature is bountiful, that if you follow God's laws, you can expect bounty and plenty. Now, there is no limit in the Bible, I believe, on that dominion. There is no time limit that says, well, be fruitful and multiply until the climate starts to be affected, and then you start to cut back, and then you start to be more, cut back your population and your consumption. The message of the Bible is that the earth is here for us, and you follow God's laws, you are a good steward, and bounty is what you can expect. Now, Malthus came along in the 18th century and said that we are no better than livestock. We are basically just stupid animals who will consume and consume and consume till we starve ourselves to death. Now, there's no evidence for any of that because we are not animals, we are not livestock. We are made in Imago Dei, the image of God. We have capacity to think, to work out problems, to analyze the world around us and make things better. Back in the 13th century, there was a massive energy crisis in England. They were running out of wood. They'd chopped down almost every forest in the country. Well, then they found they could burn coal. And there was plenty of coal in England, so they started a whole new cycle going. The point being is that the ideas of Malthus, who Marx drew from, that resources are finite, we're living in a material world, if we exploit it too much, we will starve, are completely anti-Christian, completely anti-Catholic. If you follow the Bible correctly, you'll see that there's unlimited potential in this world because we are creative beings that can solve any problem if we have the liberty to do so. And that is the key point, the liberty to do so. That's why is America great? Because America was founded on biblical principles that guaranteed private ownership, that guaranteed property rights, so people secure in those rights could go out and use the natural resources that were here to create better lives, to build great cities, to build great universities and churches. Russia had way more natural resources than America, but it had a communist system where there were no property rights. So they had massive environmental degradation coupled with poverty. The message is very clear. The Christian view brings prosperity, brings freedom, and it brings prosperity. And the Catholic bishops are now standing directly in opposition to that view. They are standing with the Marxists. They are backing the climate change extremists. Now, in 2014, the US Conference of Catholic Bishops issued their Climate Change, Justice and Health Initiative. Their website says, faithful stewards of God's creation, a Catholic response for environmental justice. Look at all the left-wing buzzwords there, people. This could have been written by the Socialist Workers' Party or by the Communist Party USA, but it came with the name of the Catholic Bishops of America on it. So I don't normally use notes, but I am today. Now, Marxism in the environmental movement. I come from New Zealand. The leader of Greenpeace in New Zealand is a young man called Russell Norman, who used to be a leader of the Socialist Workers' Party. You will find that in every environmental movement in this country, the leaders are almost universally Marxists, from the Maoist movements, from the Communist Party USA, from the Trotskyist movements. The whole movement is that the green movement is really the watermelon movement. It's green on the outside, but it's universally red in the middle. It has been the way right back into the early days of the environmental movement, back in the 60s, when the hippies realized that they couldn't get socialism through class struggle, they had to get socialism through environmentalism. In the United States, we have the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal says to fight climate change, we have to massively cut back on consumption. We have to get rid of fossil fuels. Jennifer Granholm, the Secretary of Energy in this country, has seriously said recently that by 2030, every military vehicle in this country and the armed forces must be electric. Now, can you imagine that on the battlefield? You know, you're fighting the Russians and the Chinese with their fossil fuel-fueled vehicles, and you need a battery charge. Are they going to stop fighting while you charge your batteries? What are they going to do? This is not just stupidity. This is a major problem for American national security, because can you imagine the money the US military is going to waste trying to comply with this mandate? It's not going to happen, but think of the money that will be poured down the drain when we need it for real combat effectiveness. Now, it's just coincidental that Jennifer Granholm was mentored by a woman called Millie Jeffrey, a famous Michigan Marxist, a leader of the Democratic Socialists of America. She is one of the key Marxists in the country, mentored Jennifer Granholm, who is now telling the US military they must make all their vehicles electric. We don't see that coming out of Russia. We don't see that coming out of China. Now, we also have the National Resources Defense Council in this country, one of the, by far, the most powerful environmental group. They are all about combating climate change, and they mount legal challenges all over the country to stop oil drilling, to stop any form of investment in energy extraction. They have shut down projects all over the country. They have an office in Beijing. Through the Sea Change Foundation of San Francisco, they're getting money directly from Vladimir Putin's Russia. Both Russia and China have a major interest in America shutting down its energy industry. Because if America shuts down its energy industry, that wrecks the US economy. And if you wreck the US economy, you can't afford a military budget. And therefore, you are at the mercy of those who do have a substantial military budget, like China, which now has 5 times more Navy ships than we do, and like Russia, which has way more nukes than we do. But we are being asked to sacrifice our economy and our military budget, and the Catholic bishops are supporting the movements lobbying for this. This isn't just stupidity. This isn't just wasting money and indulging some green fantasy. This is actually putting the national security and the survival of the United States at stake. Now, the very first thing that Joe Biden did when he came to office, I'm sure you'll remember, is he cancelled the Keystone Pipeline. 11,000 American jobs gone overnight. But because Native Americans were protesting in the Dakotas because the pipeline was running through tribal land. Well, the organizer of those protests was a woman called Judith LeBlanc of the Native Organizers Alliance, also of the Central Committee of the Communist Party USA. She organized that. She got that project shut down. The Communist Party USA is loyal to both Communist China, completely loyal to Communist China, and still has deep connections to Putin's Russia to this day. Now, after this, Judith LeBlanc was allowed to, went out and did massive voter registration. She's Native American herself, went out and did massive voter registration drives for Biden-Harris in several key swing states where Native Americans made up some of the proportion of the population: Arizona, New Mexico, Montana, Minnesota, etc. As a reward for all of this, she was allowed to nominate her very good friend, a second-term Congresswoman from New Mexico, Deb Haaland, as U.S. Secretary of the Interior. Deb Haaland was a nobody. Nobody had ever heard of her. But Judith LeBlanc mounted a campaign, Deb for Interior, Deb for Interior. They had buses, they had badges. They had a whole bunch of celebrity endorsements: Alyssa Milano, Sarah Silverman, Mark Ruffalo, Hanoi Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, Deb for Interior. And they put up such a campaign that Biden nominated this woman, a Marxist, as U.S. Secretary of the Interior. She now has dominion over 20% of this country, and she is shutting down every single energy lease she possibly can. She is closing down every project, every mine she can shut, she's shutting. Every mining permit she can deny, she denies. Every new energy field she can, she is closing them down. And she's working very closely with Raul Grijalva of the Environment Committee, the congressman from Arizona, who used to write for the Communist Party newspaper and was a disciple of Saul Alinsky. Together, they have complete dominion over the US energy sector. As we're facing intense competition from Russia and major military threats from China, a woman put in power by an agent of Russia and China is starving this country of energy. This is existential, people. And the Catholic bishops are endorsing the people promoting this movement. The Catholic bishops, unfortunately, seem to be going along with the Marxist agenda because it's popular, and many of them have absorbed this kind of thing through liberation theology and the actual communists who've been put into the church over a period of time. But I'll remind people that in the book of Revelations, there are a list of people who get cast into the pit of hell. And there are murderers and idolaters and thieves, but the very first people that get cast into the pit of hell are the cowards. Because the cowards have no faith. The cowards have no understanding of God's vision for this earth. They have no faith in the vision of the Catholic Church, which is to bring prosperity and freedom to all. They have no faith in the dignity of the human being. So they're willing to compromise with Marxism. They're willing to follow the dictates of the world. They're willing to follow the worldly currents rather than stand on the principles that they say they stand for. We must defund these people, folks, because they are using your money through the taxes or through your generosity in the collection plate to fund movements that are threatening not just the wealth of this country, but the national survival of this country. So I commend the people who put this together, Church Militant, for taking the stand that it has. And I hope there is a movement out there. We can start a movement to defund these people before they destroy this country and destroy the Christianity in this country they claim to champion. So thank you very much. Sorry? Sure, sure. Any questions, people? Yeah.
Off of Mexico in
Yeah.
that area, and if there's a class 4 or 5 hurricane, what are you going to do when you have to evacuate?
Well, that's not their concern, because the lithium for those cars will come via China, and China will get very rich supplying you while you sit on the side of the road in the heat wondering how you're going to get out of there. Look, we know this is madness. We know this is insanity, but it's still being inflicted on us. See, look, the Chinese are running our environmental policy in this country. Back in the Cultural Revolution, they have a thing called mass line, and it means everybody must conform to the Communist Party dictates. For a period, everybody in China had to go out and kill 10 flies every day because, you know, there were too many flies. We are seeing the Chinese mass line applied to climate change. There is no alternative. If you do not believe this garbage, you're a climate change denier, and you'll be defunded. You'll be fired from your university. You will not get research grants. You will be ridiculed. This is Chinese mass line because the Chinese want to wreck our economy and make us all starve to death in the dark so they can defeat this country. Any other questions? Nobody else? Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't stay for the other presentations. I have another engagement I have to go to. But thank you to Church Militant. Thank you all for being here today, and God bless. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Say hi to Cliff for me. Okay, sees you. All right.
Our next speaker is Professor William Wagner. He's the president of Great Lakes Justice Center. Professor William Wagner holds the academic rank of Distinguished Professor Emeritus and is an internationally recognized expert in constitutional law and good governance. As counsel in numerous matters that have come before the U.S. Supreme Court, he's authored briefs on behalf of various national Christian organizations. Professor Wagner's public service includes serving as a U.S. federal judge, legal counsel in the U.S. Senate, and chief counsel in the Michigan State Judiciary Committee. He's also served as senior assistant United States attorney in the Department of Justice and as an American diplomat and senior advisor for global criminal justice at the U.S. Department of State. His writing is published in numerous journals, books, and publications. Today he'll be talking about Michigan's new hate speech law, covering topics such as how hate speech fails to provide fair notice to the of the conduct they purport to prohibit, the backwardness of hate speech laws, making expression a felony based on the reaction and feelings of a listener rather than on the criminal intent of the speaker, how hate speech laws enable arbitrary enforcement, chilling free speech and the exercise of conscience, and why freedom of expression is not needed to protect the ideas and rights of people with whom the government agrees, but with those whom the government disagrees.
I don't have a home number for Twit SLG. Just to confirm, you'd like to call? No problem. I won't. To who?
We love technology.
That you need to be online.
All right. Professor?
And Siri.
And Siri.
Well, you know, if you ever wonder where the devil's got his most effective minions, it's in IT. So, you know, the previous speaker started in Genesis, so, you know, I wasn't planning to, but maybe I will, because it was a very good place to start. In the beginning, God. And if you want to get God out of the conversation, what is your strategy for doing so? How do we keep that viewpoint, how do we keep that topic out of the marketplace of ideas? And so when God was there at the beginning and he spoke into existence the amazing stars and the wildlife and the livestock, and I don't know if you've looked at a bird lately and seen the beauty of his creation, or you've looked at the stars and you see the power of his creation. And we see that then as he creates these things, he says, it is good. And then he creates man, and he creates woman, and he says it is very good. And then he puts them in a place that gives them a worldview through which to see the world that will keep them safe, that will keep them prosperous, that will keep them free. And it doesn't take the devil very long when God is doing good and very good to come and say, did God really say? And say, you can be just like God. You can be just like God. It can be all about you and your personal autonomy. You don't have to look to any objective truth or standard. You can make it up as you go along. And when you have a situation like that, and you say, wow, that was in Genesis. It seems like just like yesterday. If you turned on the hearings this morning and we're watching the hearings on freedom of speech and watching part of our government in a hearing on freedom of speech trying to suppress and keep people from hearing the expression. We get to a place very quickly that if you want to make up truth and you want to suppress truth, if you want to suppress ideas with which you disagree and you have the power of government to do so, well, why don't we just make a law? Why don't we just make a law? The very first time I testified and spoke out against so-called hate speech type laws where the government was using its power to regulate speech was over in Europe, was probably over a decade ago. And of course, everybody got up and said, well, nothing is going to be used against religious people here. Freedom of religious expression will still be there. It won't take you very long on your computer to find instances now where pastors are being arrested for reading the Holy Bible from right on the street. Now, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights, including life and liberty. And this liberty, made it into our Constitution as a limit on the exercise of government power. Why? Because our framers and our founders understood what Lord Acton had said so long ago, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when God is out there doing good, somebody's always going to come in and try and suppress it. And so the free exercise of religious conscience and the freedom of speech is the constitutional rule of law in this nation that serves as a limitation and a limit on the exercise of government power. Now, to be sure, from the day our Constitution was written and the day the Bill of Rights were added to it, some things were never considered speech. Things like slander or libel, that's not speech. That's not protected by the First Amendment. Things like incitement to imminent, immediate, violence, that is not speech. It's never been protected. But if you are a politically active group or a political side of a government, and you are the government and you want to be able to use your power to keep ideas from being heard, to keep ideas from entering the marketplace of ideas, wouldn't it be nice to add another thing to that list of things that aren't speech? And so you're seeing around the world, and especially around the states in this republic, attempts to add laws that regulate so-called hate speech. And you will hear the proponents of those laws argue that that the First Amendment isn't an absolute. The Supreme Court has never said it's an absolute. Well, that's true. You can't go into a bank and say, I've got a bomb and I'm going to blow up this bank unless you give me all your money. And then when you get arrested, you can't say, well, I've got a First Amendment defense to say that. That's a true threat. That's never been considered speech, and it's never been protected by the First Amendment. Just like slander, just like libel, just like incitement to immediate violence. Just like obscenity, like obscene child pornography. You can't make a movie of a child and exploit a child and then say, hey, I'm just exercising my First Amendment rights. Those things have never been considered speech. And therefore, they're not protected by the First Amendment. And that is why what you're seeing on the left, the attempt to do is to add another thing called hate speech to that list. The problem is, what they're really doing when you peel back the word hate speech is you see that they're regulating ideas, they're regulating political viewpoints, they're regulating sacred viewpoints. And they're putting a label on it to make it sound good for you in the media or the general public. And here's the problem. Many problems exist with hate speech laws. But perhaps the most troubling are the provisions that unconstitutionally make citizens criminally punishable for their ideas and for their viewpoints. And let's go beyond the First Amendment, and let's look at the 14th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment that requires due process. And we have treaties that the United States are signatories to that require due process. And the very minimal requirement of due process is that you give notice to a citizen of what is criminal. You have to give notice of the citizen to the citizen of what is criminal, so the citizen can choose whether to engage in criminal conduct or to stay and walk the course of good conduct. And the citizen knows that if I engage in criminal conduct, I can and should be and would probably be prosecuted. The bank example again. If you rob a bank, you know there's a law out there that says that is a criminal offense, and you know that before you rob the bank. The problem with these so-called speech codes is that they make the crime manifest after the conduct. Because under the example, they asked me to talk about Michigan, under Michigan's law and under the law in Colorado and the laws that are being proposed around the United States, what these laws do is they make it a crime based on the perception of the listener, not based on what the speaker says. And so the perception of the listener says, oh, I feel intimidated, or I feel harassed, or I feel offended, depending on however they vaguely define whatever the speech offense is, but they make it contingent upon what the listener says. So now imagine a speaker utters, reads some passages from the book of Romans with regard to sexuality. And because, let's use that as an example, because the way I really got involved in some of this is there was a pastor in Sweden that was preaching from the Bible to a little congregation of about 20 people, and the prosecutor in Sweden thought that sermon was so dangerous because he was teaching the biblical principles of sexuality that we had to put that guy in prison and that guy in jail. And so, again, based on the perception of this prosecutor who's listening now and says, I think that this should be something that is dangerous to the community, therefore I'm going to take this vaguely worded statute, similar to the ones we have in the United States, and I'm going to remove that idea from the marketplace of ideas, and I'm even going to remove it from the church. And so they put the guy in jail. Now, if you wonder if God is sovereign, if he does have a sense of humor, this case went all the way to the Swedish Supreme Court. And the justices said, well, I've read all the briefs, but we can't decide this case unless we actually hear the sermon. And because this had become such a big thing in Sweden, the entire country was watching it on national television, and Parliament had shut down to attend the hearings. And so this little sermon that was so dangerous for 20 people to hear was now broadcast to the entire nation of Sweden. We need something like that to happen here, in the United States, because we don't need the First Amendment to protect us from the government when the government agrees with what we're saying. We need the First Amendment to protect citizens when the government disagrees with what they're hearing. And that's exactly what, again, these laws are designed to do, is allow government to use its power against the citizen when they hear something they disagree with. And the way they do it is they design the law in such a way that it becomes a crime based on the perception of the listener, and the listener says, I'm offended, I'm intimidated, or I am harassed, depending on how it's defined. And all of a sudden, you've got a felony and somebody going to jail. Now, remember, that speaker, those same words that came out of that speaker's mouth, another person in the audience could be listening and say, what wisdom? You've changed my mind. Thank you. To the second person, no crime. A good speech. To the first person, a felony. But only decided not before the person opened their mouth, but only after. No notice of what is a criminal. So it violates every precept of due process that our Constitution has always stood for. In addition to that, the First Amendment requires that the government not use its power to regulate the viewpoint or the content of a person's speech. And all these laws inevitably do just that. They don't say you can't intimidate a person. They say, or harass a person. They say you can't harass a person, based in part upon, your viewpoint on sexual orientation, gender identity, race, etc. With these specific categories, these specific viewpoints. And the Supreme Court has expressly spoke on that. You can't regulate, if you're the government, speech based on the viewpoint. You can't only allow the viewpoints that you agree with and then make a felony the viewpoints you disagree with. And here's the other thing that these laws inevitably do. They write them in such a way, and even the definitions are written in such a way that they're so vague and ambiguous that if you are a pastor, a priest, a member of the press, or even a politician out on the stump, you're afraid to talk because you can't tell what is a crime, what is not a crime. It's so vague, and when it's vague, it allows the government who has the power to arbitrarily enforce that power to those that they disagree with, and allow those they agree with to continue to do what they want to do without facing any sanction. And so arbitrary enforcement and the possibility of arbitrary enforcement because of a vaguely written law regulating speech, that has the natural effect of making somebody not speak. You can just feel the chill of the Arctic coming over a person when they look at this. Wow, if I actually get up here and I speak on sexuality from a biblical worldview, am I going to face a felony charge? Am I going to face civil charges? Well, I would like to think that I would still stand up and fiercely be unafraid to speak the truth, and I'd like to think that I would do it with compassion and respect. But I understand those that don't. And that's why, and our founders understood that, and that's why they put the First Amendment in place, and that's why every state in this nation has similar limitations on the exercise of power. So in a constitutional republic like ours, freedom of expression is not needed to protect the ideas and rights of people with whom the government agrees. It's needed to protect those with whom the government does not agree. These hate speech laws are wholly inconsistent with fundamental principles of constitutional good governance and the rule of law. They need to end. I can tell you that the bishops in the Catholic Conference in Michigan, when these laws were up, no position, didn't see them, and I was expecting them to be sitting next to me, testifying against them. we need at this time in our republic people to be boldly unafraid to stand and speak the truth, and to boldly be unafraid to preserve the free exercise of religious expression, but to always do it with compassion and respect. But that first part is just as important. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Yes?
How are the U.S. bishops specifically aiding in the spread of these hate speech laws, and what can we do about it?
Well, I can speak to what I personally saw in Michigan. I wasn't there, I was, when Colorado's law was just struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't know what their position was. I know what I saw in Michigan and the Catholic Conference there. They were in the hearing room because there was another bill that they had a position. I thought they were there to oppose this, hate speech law because of the impact on religious and sacred viewpoints. Nothing. And so when and he's a good guy, I said, why aren't you guys here? And I don't want to speak for him, but I could tell he had his orders.
Any more questions?
So what is the next course of events regarding what's going to happen now in Michigan with that law?
Well, it's really funny because when I had spoke with, everybody, it was like, oh, here's that conservative professor again. Here's that religious man again. And they started to, I think, then at least made a phone call to somebody on the left, maybe the ACLU or somebody, and it slowed it down a little bit. Then it was on full course to be signed by the governor, and then the U.S. Supreme Court came down and struck down the Colorado law that was virtually the same as Michigan, and they struck it down for all the reasons that I'd been telling them that Michigan's law was going to, face a problem, and so right now it's on hold. My hope is if they fix it in such a way that they remove all the speech stuff and keep it all about violence. I mean, because we all can agree, physical violence against anybody, should be a crime. Now, again, as a United States prosecutor, I prosecuted and put somebody in jail who took a pipe and he was a skinhead and beat a person pretty badly based on the sexual lifestyle that this guy was leading. That was, and I don't want to tell you how many years, decades ago that was, but there wasn't even such a thing as a hate crime back then. But this person went to prison and went to jail because he committed a violent crime. A lot of times when you can, add all these other things, you can move a different political agenda down the road that has nothing to do with criminal justice. Yes?
We have time for one more.
To the best of your knowledge, are there any dioceses or archdioceses, Catholic dioceses or archdioceses in the United States where the priests, the monsignors or bishops are standing up or going down and testifying?
I think I might defer to, do you know an answer?
As far as specifically testifying in committee hearings against these sorts of laws, we're not aware of that. If there is, and any of the bishops, which I'm sure a few are paying attention to this press conference, we'd certainly like to hear from you, but that's what we do every day. We have our heads in this 10, 12 hours every day. I've yet to hear of one bishop. I mean, a priest might do something, but a priest doesn't have any authority over a diocese. As far as we know, no bishop, and certainly not a bishop's conference, has stepped forward and appeared at these committee hearings in various state legislatures and said, no, we oppose this. And to speak specifically to Michigan, Michigan's Catholic Conference is made up of the bishops and the dioceses and archdioceses of 9 different dioceses, archdioceses of Detroit and all the other various dioceses in the state, 8 more. And the fact that, they had an opportunity in the House committee hearings to oppose this, that have opportunity in the Senate committee hearings to oppose this, they didn't even show up. So I think that's rather typical across the country.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, sorry. I'll get you afterwards.
Yeah, scroll. Yep. the sin of omission is oftentimes as great as the sin of commission. Our next speaker is Sheena Rodriguez. She is the president and foundress of Alliance for a Safe Texas. Rodriguez recently testified before Congress on the issue of illegal immigration and unaccompanied minors. She has focused her recent efforts on raising awareness for the current border crisis, as she views the border crisis as an extension of the pro-life movement. For nearly 2 years, Rodriguez has made frequent visits to the Texas border and has spent several months focusing on the Del Rio sector. When not at the border, she often can be found at the Texas Capitol, attempting to influence legislation to help fortify Texas. The topic of her speech today is illegal immigration and child trafficking. She'll be covering a brief overview of collaboration between the local and international agencies, such as the UN, the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and Catholic Charities, and how they incentivize mass illegal migration worldwide. How lobbying efforts on the federal and state levels actively work against Americans and our communities, and how governmental organizations, or non-governmental organizations, NGOs, such as Catholic Charities, use taxpayer funds to aid child smuggling operations, and what actions can be taken to stem this growing problem. Please welcome Ms. Rodriguez.
What if I told you that there are non-governmental organizations or NGOs that facilitate and profit from a process using your taxpayer money, which places fellow human beings, including children, in vulnerable situations where there is a high probability that they will be taken advantage of by vicious cartel and transnational organizations who will exploit them by charging money, which these vulnerable people often do not have, with the promise to bring them to the United States, further incentivized by our current policies and thrusting them into a modern-day slavery scheme. Many of these international and domestic organizations are simultaneously working against U.S. immigration laws with the assistance from the Biden administration, who has given them fuel to this mass modern-day slavery scheme and the most massive, unprecedented scale in modern history. And what if I then told you that this was being done under what some may perceive as a distortion for fundamental Christian principles? Let's first discuss the international NGO ties. The International Organization of Migration, or IOM, is the UN's immigration arm. The IOM website proudly boasts their affiliation with Catholic organizations and operate in the Vatican City State. The IOM champions the Global Compact of Migration and the International Compact for, quote, safe, orderly, and regular migration. Safe and orderly. Sound familiar? Mayorkas sure does like to plagiarize. The UN and the IOM reference to international law as they have defined it, under the assumption that it supersedes the laws of sovereign nations and states. It operates under the self-proclaimed declaration of the UN that migration is a human right, often echoing far-left rhetorical lines such as "no human is illegal," claiming that immigration enforcement by sovereign nations is discriminatory, dehumanizing, outdated, and oppressive. Feeling guilty yet? There are several Catholic organizations on the global scale for migrants. The International Catholic Migration Commission, or ICMC, is based in Geneva and works collaboratively with UNICEF and other international groups, including the World Economic Forum, or the WEF, and the IOM. Instead of discouraging irregular migration, UNICEF and the IOM and the Red Cross are just a few of the organizations that operate in and around the Darien Gap. instead of discouraging such a perilous journey, often resulting in the rape and the death of untold number of migrants, these groups instead reportedly hand out rape kits to women and children. War correspondent Michael Young and several others have documented these activities and revealed the contents of these kits, which include condoms and morning after abortion pills. I have personally witnessed what some have reported: condoms, pills, and pamphlets coaching illegal aliens how to skirt tail around U.S. immigration laws, all given by these NGOs, including affiliated with the Catholic Church, left behind on the Texas banks of the Rio Grande and in Arizona, along with piles and piles of human trash and waste. The lobbying efforts on the federal and state levels are actively working against Americans in our communities. Catholic Charities often only speaks of reforming the broken immigration system, advocating to make it easier for asylee seekers, DACA recipients, and the need for increased legal pathways. Very rarely, if at all, with any mentions of the necessities of securing the border. In an August 2022 statement, Catholic Charities USA stated, quote, "Migrants are vulnerable people who are fleeing their countries of origin, typically because of war, violence, drug trafficking, ecological devastation, collapsing social order, and failing economic conditions or other untenable situations that have made living there impossible." Statements like these often give the perception that all, if not most, of the individuals apprehended along the border are all in dire need, fleeing from war or persecution, and are credible cases of asylum. In my own experience along the border, with over thousands of illegal aliens that I've encountered, the overwhelming majority have openly stated that they are coming to the United States for better financial opportunity. To be clear, economic reasons are not listed as credible claims for asylum. It is difficult to imagine that individuals from over 160 countries and well over 8 million known apprehensions in such a short time span are all fleeing persecution at the same time and not influenced by other actual root causes, such as the incentivizing policies of our government and these NGOs. In other words, many are in fact not claiming asylum, and those who are often not found to be credible claims. For example, out of more than 1.7 million encounters at the southern border in 2021, according to DHS, less than 2% were found to be credible claims. In other words, the lack of evidence supporting their attempts to convince Americans that they are helping solely, quote, asylum seekers simply does not add up with verifiable data. Furthermore, Catholic Charities and the Conference of Catholic Bishops displayed strong public opposition against the recent Congressional Secure the Border Act of 2023, along with continued opposition against the building of the Southern Wall and any efforts that they perceive or categorize as, quote, restricting asylum, claiming that it would, quote, cause the United States to violate its international obligations. What of the obligations to our country and to our communities as the U.S. continues to face frightening increases in violent crimes, record high homelessness, and many struggling to put food on the table with crushing high inflation rates? Catholic Charities often teams up with other open border advocacy groups such as RACES, or Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services. RACES maintains deep ties with several Soros-funded groups. RACES was also one of the many groups that fiercely fought to end the DNA testing for family units used to verify that children that are coming over with other adults are in fact related to those adults, bringing them into the U.S. after illegally crossing, despite ample evidence of fraudulent family units and exploitation. The Catholic Legal Immigration Network, or Clinic, was founded in 1988 by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Clinic has received millions in support from George Soros and has donated to several other domestic far-left open border advocacy groups such as MALDEF. Just last month, Clinic posted a demand letter calling on the Biden administration and DHS to, quote, immediately cease conducting credible fear interviews in CBP custody and instead ensure that asylum seekers are given full and fair access to the U.S. asylum system, while simultaneously praising Biden's ending of President Trump's, quote, anti-asylum policies. Interestingly, credible fear interviews are often part of the legal asylum process. Why the push then to end such a process? Could it be because if allowed to continue, Americans may realize the truth of the low number of credible asylum claims? None of this comes without a hefty price tag. Lobbying seems to have its advantages. The Conference of Catholic Bishops lobbied for a total of nearly $30 billion in appropriations of American taxpayer dollars just for fiscal year 2024. Related, of course, to addressing the rising cost of immigration in the U.S. For FEMA awards for 2023 alone, since 2023, more than $713 million have been allocated under various grants and awards to help aid with the border crisis, most of which, of course, is given back to these NGOs. However, the exact amounts are extraordinarily difficult to track. NGOs are also lobbying in our state capital. Catholic Charities and other NGOs also caring for UACs for unaccompanied children receive millions in Texas taxpayer funds for the care of state foster care children. In other words, they're not only receiving large amounts of federal taxpayer money, but are also rewarded with state contracts. However, there is no clear distinction easily available to the public of how the state funds allocated for American foster care children are kept separate from the care of those who illegally crossed into the U.S. During the time of such unprecedented numbers, Catholic charities in the diocese also lobby against the state of Texas's efforts in attempting to secure our sovereign state border. And Texans often claim, and against Texans, often claiming that such legislation would work against the asylum seekers. In 2021, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a proclamation revoking the state licensings for HHS contracted NGOs operating in Texas and housing unaccompanied minors. The Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops, which also lobbies for Catholic charities in the state, continued without a state license and was shortly after conveniently after much lobbying efforts, was given an exemption, allowing for a complete disregard of the governor's orders. During the last regular Texas legislative session, there were two bills that were aimed in different ways to provide state and local governments some much-needed oversight into these facilities operating in the state. These facilities often put a tremendous strain, especially on the rural communities, and many times under the Biden administration are seemingly popping up overnight with little to no communication to even our local law enforcement. States must try to do something about these facilities, yet Catholic Charities was the main organization that actively lobbied against these bills. Simultaneously, these are the same NGOs that continued self-advocating efforts for more and more of Texas taxpayer dollars. So what exactly is the role of NGOs such as Catholic Charities utilizing taxpayer funds to aid in the furthering unprecedented number of migrants into the interior of the U.S.? On several occasions while visiting the RGV area, the Rio Grande Valley, I personally witnessed and interviewed numerous American homeless individuals who claimed that they were forced out of Catholic charity shelters to make room for illegal aliens. During COVID, while Americans were forced to stay home, our children kept out of schools, churches closed, and many Americans' businesses forced shut. I witnessed rooms full from wall to wall with illegal aliens, which was later confirmed to me by employees that were also working inside of these facilities at the RGV Catholic Charities location, as they helped to facilitate the movement of unaccompanied minors, family units, and single adults further into the nation's interior. Many of the sick migrants were flown and bused into the Metroplex areas across Texas, such as Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, for medical treatment, which was helped to continue the reported high numbers of cases of COVID. Catholic Charities and other faith-based NGOs continue to provide funds, transportation, and more to migrants who continuously break our immigration laws with the use of taxpayer dollars. We are currently seeing similar transportation of sick migrants still currently, right now, with tuberculosis and syphilis. Again, done with a complete disregard for the safety of Americans and our communities. Often NGOs operate with a total disregard of state and federal law and with a complete lack of transparency while advocating for more migration with a so-called focus, again, on international law. Essentially using taxpayer funds to further transport unaccompanied minors directly into the hands of unvetted sponsors, and according to whistleblowers, with a complete disregard for the safety of these children, along with unverified family units to their destination of choice. As I testified before Congress, I have personally witnessed and spoken to young children along the border, explained to me that they were told by total and complete strangers, many of whom their minors claimed were working inside of NGOs, who to ask for them when they arrived to the U.S. Often, the children claimed they had never met or personally spoken to their alleged sponsors. While the news of the unaccompanied minors who DHS has conveniently lost track of has thankfully reached some news headlines, this is by no means a new phenomenon. Verifiable cases of sex and labor trafficking of children with the use of taxpayer funds has been recorded for years and made significantly worse under the current administration. Meanwhile, groups affiliated with Catholic Charities and the USCCB advocate for even more relaxed procedures and faster turnaround on detention. Conveniently, many NGOs receive reimbursement per person, which would make a fast turnaround financially prudent. Many do not realize that DHS often relies on these NGOs for not only the care of the unaccompanied minors, but also for the vetting of these potential sponsors. How many of these verifiable cases of trafficked children, and how many that are unknown, are a direct result of supposed vetting done by these NGOs? This is the question that we all must begin to ask ourselves. Is the Catholic congregation and Americans being lied to by these NGOs? Make no mistake, our God is a God of law and order and the creator of sovereign nations. As Christians, we are called to protect the innocent and the most vulnerable, not to help facilitate and promote that which is proven to create chaos and policies proven to further the exploitation of children in our country. Secure borders help to stop that exploitation. Thank you for your time.
We've got 4 minutes for questions.
All right, so you brought up George Soros's, influence in all this, and recently, as you might know, the Pope met with Soros's son, Alexander. What role has Pope Francis's influence in this whole debacle with the immigration? Do you think he's made it even worse? Do you think, what's your opinion on that?
I think that anyone who denies the fact that a clear dismissal of sovereign nations' immigration laws and the clear ties that it has to the exploitation of human beings, including children, is in of itself an issue and helping to facilitate this. So if we're not addressing this issue head on, and we're not directly saying, you know what, we need to, yes, we love everyone, yes, we're here as Americans, for example, I want to help those who are in need. But if we're doing so by incentivizing what we know and what has been proven to cause more exploitation, we need to speak up and say enough is enough. And I would expect that our leaders to be able to do that. So, yes.
Just to add to that for a moment, the position the church is teaching, and it does have a teaching on immigration, is grossly misrepresented by the bishops, archbishops, cardinals, and to the degree that he references this, the Pope. They take one part of the teaching, which is obviously based on the commandment to love your neighbor, and say that to the degree they can, nations should be welcoming of immigrants and people in desperate measures. However, there's a back end of that teaching which completely is ignored. You can look this up in the catechism. When immigrants come here, they have a duty to assimilate, to respect the laws and the cultures and the customs and the mores of the nation which they are granted, given asylum or immigration rights into. They never talk about that part, ever. They present it as though you have a moral obligation and it is a sin to not blow up your borders and let people in who are in more desperate means than you are. That is not Catholic teaching. And it's right there in the catechism. Don't take my word for it. It's right there.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand the argument about how Catholic Charities is incentivizing this. Are you talking about like the respite centers? Because I mean that work. I was back there in like 2014 when like Glenn Beck and Ted Cruz, Randy Weber, and Louis Gohmert all went down there and celebrated that work and brought children toys at those respite centers. And also, I just want to make sure that we're looking at the same numbers. Did you say that only 2% of credible fear cases were found in 2021?
In 2021, according to the information on DHS, and I have the citations, I'll be happy to send the notes as well to you to see exactly where I'm pulling that from.
The only reason I'm saying that, their data says 68%. And
I'm sorry, say that again?
Their data says 68%. I want to make sure that we're looking at the same
80%?
68% of credible fear cases.
68%.
In 2021, which is a marked improvement over 2020 when it was only 38%, I think. Yeah. But again, we might be looking at different numbers. I just wanted clarity on that.
Yeah, I have the citations. I'll be happy, if you'll get with me afterwards, I'll be happy to go ahead and email that over to you to show exactly where I was getting that data from. But as far to answer your actual question, I'm not saying, nobody is saying that they don't do good work. Nobody is saying that any of these NGOs don't do good work. However, I have seen them in our state capital of Texas, where they are actively advocating against legislation, including 2 bills that I had presented, that were set in place to actually help these communities and help these facilities, and yet they're wanting exemptions from state licensing. Those measures are put in place to actually protect the children that are in there in the communities where these facilities are located at. So when you are actively trying to work against border legislation, as we as a state are trying to put in place, I have to question the motivations. I have to.
I know that we have a couple more questions, but at the scrum, you can get with her and cover up. Or not cover up. Yeah. Lots of covering up, but not on our end. Okay, our last speaker is Zoe Warren. He's a Second Amendment activist. He's a filmmaker, freelance video producer, documentarian, and journalist who has been producing commercial narrative and news content since 2009. He has worked in, local and regional news, and is currently an editor-at-large for the Standard SC, is owner of Pisuto Productions, and hosts the New American Magazine program 2A for Today. The topic of his speech today is gun rights, why your right to bear arms comes from God, not the government, how every right comes with responsibility, how Americans should educate themselves on gun safety along with their neighbors and community, and why a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state.
Good afternoon. How are you guys? My name is Zoe Warren. I'm from Lexington, South Carolina. I'm honored to be here with you, Church Militant and media. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Power is ever stealing from the many to the few. My name is Zoe Warren. Again, I'm the host of a program called 2A for Today. 2A for Today is a program where I explore all things Second Amendment, all things that protect, threaten, and violate the God-given and Second Amendment protected right of all Americans. From unconstitutional executive orders, legislation, judicial tyranny and overreach, to how you can get trained and be better prepared to defend yourself, your family, your neighbors, and your rights. So if the Second Amendment's important to you guys, make sure to subscribe to the New American Magazine and get on the top daily headline mailing list. And you'll get an update anytime we upload a video or stream a live event. Now, I'm a student, I'm a reporter, and I've been interviewing and learning from experts, scholars, trainers, and all forms of gun right activists. I've been listening to understand and reporting on what I've learned. It's my mission to unpack the various laws and long-standing trespasses of our rights that have already been enacted, and by doing that, I hope to help educate the populace and our legislators in our efforts to neutralize tyranny. I was a field medical service and dental technician in the Navy. I was stationed with the 1st MARDIV, 1st FSSG. I took an oath to defend our Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, and that oath doesn't expire. From my time in active duty to now, I've discovered that we are steeped and hemmed in on every side by what I can only call color of law infringements on our God-given right and our Second Amendment protections. Today, I want to sum up what I've learned. I hope this presentation will provoke all of you to do a deeper investigation of the ideas that you're going to hear. I hope this presentation will serve as a motivation for you and your families to join the fight and help us secure our rights. To put it plainly, what we're facing in America is a well-funded and strategic effort to cause America to schism and be powerless to resist. Our opponents believe that your rights come from the government, not from God. They believe that for a very long time. In public statements, even recently, 3 cardinals from some of the largest cities in America, New York, Newark, and Chicago, have taken the position that Americans should voluntarily give up their right to guns. And to quote one of them, unrestrained gun ownership is a serious threat to the weak in our communities. For those who don't have time to listen to this whole presentation, here's a Cliff Notes version. Your right to bear arms comes from God, not the government. Every right comes with a responsibility. Americans need to educate themselves on gun safety and do this with their neighbors and their community, and a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. I've crafted my presentation today in an effort to answer these following questions, so if you're taking notes. Where does the right to keep and bear arms come from? What was the intention of the founders when they wrote the Second Amendment? And if everyone can keep and bear arms, won't that mean that we'll have more armed criminals? So hopefully I'll answer those questions sufficiently. So where does the right to keep and bear arms come from? I believe that our founders were brilliant, hardworking, courageous men who lived in very insecure and dangerous times. Tyrants, spies, and betrayal were as frequent as dysentery in the colonial days as our forebears struggled against nature itself to survive a brutal and unforgiving North American frontier. Those brilliant men would draft some of the greatest treatises on liberty ever penned, and the ideals expressed in their writings informed a future generation, which is us, with the wisdom to grow, to schism, to heal, and produce the most peaceful, prosperous, and liberal, that's classically liberal, country that the world has ever known. Americanism, which is their philosophy, would go on to help end state-sanctioned slavery in every first world country. There's never been another nation on the history of the world where 2 people who look exactly the same fought against each other over a bunch of pickaninnies who didn't look nothing like them. But that's the heritage of us in America. Their example of selfless devotion to serve and provide for their posterity, again us, to experience the blessings of liberty is yet unmatched. Such honorable and praiseworthy men and women gave their lives and fortunes in service to the cause of preserving that blessing. The founders of this country took many of their cues on morality and what constitutes justice and law from the Word of God. They weren't all Christians, but you don't have to have the Holy Spirit to read the Old and New Testaments and witness the vast wisdom and moral clarity that exudes from its pages. The first constitution in the Western world was inspired by the preaching of Reverend Thomas Hooker, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, and they stand as a monument to the wisdom of God and the source inspiration for our states and our nation's constitutions. Hooker's message, which maintained that governors rule through the consent of the governed, informed Thomas Jefferson's understanding when he crafted the Declaration of Independence. Our very federal republic and separation of powers is based on Christians' understanding of God's dispensation of power. Charles Montesquieu, the French philosopher who wrote The Spirit of Laws, on which our founders relied in forming the American form of republic, loved the Christian religion and the Bible. His understanding and phrasing of the separation of powers, checks and balances, and natural law informed the discretion of our founders. Our founders declared independence from the crown, but they also declared independence from tyrannical government of every kind. That document expressed very clearly that our rights come from our Creator, not from the will of the government, but the will of God. And those rights are self-evident. They went on to say that governments are instituted among men to secure our rights, and if those governments become hostile to our free expression of those rights, then it's the right and duty of those independent people to alter or abolish those governments. And you'll find the government soon calling you anti-government extremist if you believe that. I just want to make clear that I don't support political violence of any kind. But it is of the utmost importance that we understand that our founders recognize that our God-given right to keep and bear arms is an impediment and a restraint on those who would use the government to impose political violence on us. Kind of like our Navy, we troll the sea as a show of force, a presence that reminds our opponents that they will not oppress or harm Americans without suffering massive losses and utter defeat. An armed and trained American populace is a check on tyranny. The percentage of Americans who understand that is inversely proportional to the level of tyranny that we will find the governing willing to impose on its people. And by tyranny, I mean the trespassing of our God-given rights. So what was the intention of the founders when they wrote the second? Political and religious persecution were primary fears of the colonists who created our American form of republic. The founders wanted to codify securing our rights, and so they created a Bill of Rights as amendments to the enumerated powers originally drafted in the Constitution. Our founders wanted to ensure that the national government was prevented from being used to impose a tyrannical will across the nation. They crafted the first two amendments to protect our ability to perform the two great commands freely. The two greatest commands are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Why do you say that, Zoe? Well, the founders wanted to prevent any centralization of government power from abridging our ability to obey those commands. Let's look at the first. Freedom to practice our religion without the national government dictating how or what religion. Freedom of speech, to be able to preach anywhere you want. Freedom of the press, so that we can print a sermon, booklet, or report that condemns the government, or even print a Bible. They were being put to death for that overseas, without being put to death or molested by the U.S. government. Freedom of assembly, so that we can gather and worship as we see fit. And protection of our right to petition the government to address any of our perceived offenses when we feel that we've just lived our conscience and the national government has violated our right as a consequence. The Second Amendment protects our ability to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It secures our ability to secure ourselves and our neighbors. It's unreasonable for anyone to think that the religious and moral men who fasted and prayed and deliberated for months would ever expect that any American would accept being hamstrung by law to disobey the command to love your neighbor as yourself. If we would use arms to protect ourselves, then according to the second greatest command, that makes us duty-bound to do the same to protect our neighbors. If we would call the police to protect our family, there is no clause in that love your neighbor as yourself that, exempts you from being a hypocrite if you wouldn't let somebody call on you. The only duty in the Constitution where the word necessary is used is not the president or even Congress, but the militia, being necessary to the security of a free state. That's a pretty bold statement. You guys look it up. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment says nothing about self-defense. Actually, the original right was a given to our founders. There was no debating that, period. Even so, it's covered by the Ninth Amendment. We've drifted so far from understanding the amendment, the Second Amendment, that what our duty is as citizens, that the way that most Americans approach it today renders void the intention of the Second Amendment. It wasn't written only to make sure that I could carry the most effective means of protecting myself. It was written in order to protect our right to carry the most effective means of protecting ourselves and our neighbors. It's actually a laughable notion that the founders would have tolerated any federal order that would prevent children whose parents were sick from carrying arms to hunt food or even protect their families from rogue and undercover agents of the crown or nomadic and rapacious marauders. Today, if I use a weapon to defend and protect my neighbor, I could be thrown in jail for a night or more. We have a problem, but we can fix it. When the founders wrote that amendment, there was no police force. There wasn't even a standing army. The militia consisted of able-bodied men over a certain age as defined by each state. The Second Amendment expressly forbids the federal government from making any laws or giving any orders that infringe upon the rights of the people to both keep and bear arms. And those in the church who point to Jesus telling Peter to put a sword away, well, he told them to put it away and not give it to Caesar. Who better to bear the sword than a just person? Romans 13 says that his ministers bear the sword. He didn't mean the heathen forever and ever, amen. In 1 Corinthians 6, verse 2, he says that, don't you know the saints will judge the world? Who better than a just person? The heathen? No. A few examples of just people bearing the sword and protecting themselves and their family and their friends. A disabled homeowner in Marion County, Florida, armed with an AR-15, shot and killed 2 intruders, and he was himself injured during a home invasion and attempted robbery. Whitfield Smith at his home in Atlanta, Georgia, defended off 3 gunmen who were on foot and 2 who were in a vehicle. Whitfield fired a warning shot with his Hi-Point 995, then braved the theater shirtless with pajama bottoms and a pair of flip-flops. He was met with gunfire, so he dropped back for cover and to grab his AR-15. The thugs took off before Whitfield returned, and he secured the area, and there were no casualties. A pregnant Florida woman, armed with a semi-automatic rifle, gunned down one of 2 home invaders who had broken in and were pistol whipping her husband. On my show 2A for Today, we spotlight defensive use stories because of how difficult, if not impossible, it is to prove a negative. What I mean is that when a firearm is used to prevent crime, it's often not reported, or it's put on the 8th page of a print paper in the digital age. So we make every effort to raise awareness and celebrate those brave men and women who defend their neighbors, their families, or themselves. We call them our 2A for Today modern militiamen and women. The U.S. Supreme Court has reaffirmed on multiple occasions that law enforcement have no legal duty to protect anyone that are not actively in their custody. So whose responsibility is it to protect you and me, whether you believe in God or not? It's God, right, I guess. It's his responsibility. We're his hands and feet, so we better get to work, right? I love my local law enforcement. They are some of the bravest and most self-sacrificial men and women alive today, but their job isn't to protect the populace. And it's our own failure to understand and protect our God-given right to protect ourselves and duty to protect our neighbors that has made our society so vulnerable to evildoers. The reason that we are losing our rights through massive infringements by the national government or an overreach by our states is our failure to seriously take up our duty. If we don't attend to our responsibility, then we will lose our rights. That truth is also self-evident. If everyone can keep and bear arms, won't that create more crime? Won't we have more armed criminals? It's now been a year since the Supreme Court handed down the Bruin decision, a decision that declared New York State's concealed carry law unconstitutional because it required proper cause for an individual to obtain a concealed carry permit. The Bruin decision may seem like a win for gun owners, but it's also a loss for folks like me who believe in strictly enumerated powers and states' rights. The national government wasn't enumerated power to form its lips or lift its pen to make legislation concerning gun rights at all. Infringements on an individual's right to carry should not be executed with some blanket national government decree, as if state and local courts need congressional nannies. State courts should levy their own power, and a free state legislature can set limits on violent citizens without the federal reach around. I'm not going to go too deep in the woods on that today, but so back to the point. There's a reason that criminals don't break into the place with the most guns, money, and drugs in the city. You know where that is? It's the police evidence room. You want to know why? Because it's surrounded by armed, trained people. The militia necessary for the security of a free state needs to be armed and trained. For the founders, well-regulated didn't mean prohibited or infringed, but trained. Not as a requirement to be permitted, but a state of being for the highest security of a free state full of free people. Our states should be training the militia. It's in our laws. I'm going to close up with this. I have a little bit more, but I don't have time. The problem is the constitutionally daft act of Congress called the Dick Act, which effectively created 2 classes of militia. The organized militia, or the National Guard, which referred to the regularly enlisted, organized, and uniformed militia, and then the unorganized, or reserve militia, which referred to every able-bodied citizen between 18 and 45. The Dick Act has created a place for our states to shirk their responsibility to train a majority of the militia in America, the unorganized militia. The states could simply give a non-refundable tax credit for anyone who gets gun safety and tactical training throughout the year with some local private trainers who partner with the sheriffs, and that would be solved. And then our streets would be a lot safer, because without a trained militia, there is no security, and there won't be a free people for long. Thank you guys. My name is Zoe Warren. Thank you for your attention.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time. It is now 2:30, so we have time for a couple questions. Okay, we do have time for a couple of questions.
Thought I got out of that. Doggone it.
Any questions from the press first? Okay, here we go.
So given that there seems to be a certain reluctance for both clergy and other Christian leaders to preach about the obligation to carry arms from the pulpit, what can the laity and other Christians do in order to encourage them to be a little bit more open about this particular subject?
Yeah, I would offer this: get together with your neighbors. The reason why we have so many police, and this might sound like defund the police, but it's not. They're the most underpaid, courageous people on the planet. But we have so many police officers because we have so much crime because we have so many police officers. And what do I mean? What do you mean by that? Don't just cut that and put that out there, guys. What do you mean by that, Zoe? What I mean is that because we don't know and love our neighbors, we have to hire people to protect us from our neighbors. They could be training us in tactical training. They could be taking us hunting. They could be teaching our children to be men and women that are honorable like they are. So,
I'm just curious how you deal with. There's no shortage of people who argue from a Christian tradition that you should be armed and the right to bear arms. There's also no shortage of people who argue the opposite from the Christian tradition. The Quakers have been around since the founding of the United States, were involved in revolution and held a very different disposition. I'm curious how you balance that while appealing to American history and obviously this tradition of right to bear arms in a theological sense, and those who have argued the opposite since it's found.
Well, I balance it this way, and I'm going to start with this, and then I'll answer your question. In Pilate's presence, Jesus said, "If my kingdom was from here, my servants would fight. But now my kingdom's not from here." He didn't say it will never be from here. What a lot of Christians have done is taken words that were in a vacuum of time, like put away your sword, to mean you never should carry one. And that was kind of a miscommunication that's gone throughout the ages. Who better than the just to bear the sword? I mean, in Psalm 125:3, it says, "The scepter of wickedness shall not remain on the land of the righteous." So that means if the righteous do their job, they'll be the ones in power. It was never God's intention that there would never be a Christian king. And a Christian king bears a sword for a reason. And if you resist his power, well, then you receive damnation. That's what it says in Romans 13. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right, I just want to remind everybody that we're going to have a scrum right over here so that you can interview our speakers. And then afterwards, if you still want to continue the conversation, then they'll be set up for individual interviews a little bit later. But for closing comments, Michael is going to give you just a few of his own remarks.
And cognizant of the fact that we are a couple of moments over time, I shall cut them and make them very brief. I would just, first of all, like to thank all of the donors who we have been asking for a couple of weeks to fund this event. It's been a tremendously intense time for Church Militant and other coalition members to bring all of this together here in Washington, D.C. So a heartfelt thank you for that. We have thousands, I've just been keeping updated back in the studio, we have thousands of people, in addition to, I believe it's about a dozen other media outlets actually watching this online. So thank you for your participation, both professionally and just as interested parties. I'd like to close, if I could, speaking specifically to the media, sort of heart to heart here. I've been a journalist my entire life. I worked at CBS News in New York. I was an anchor, reporter, producer out in affiliate land. You guys, you media, all know what that means. Not always fun. I'm not bragging, I'm just making a point for credentials. I'm a recipient of 4 different Emmy Awards for investigative journalism. So I would like to speak to you for just one brief moment. The business that we are in is the business of truth, that we are to convey the truth of the matter in a fair and accurate manner. I know that seems like probably an antiquated notion today. That's what I was raised on in journalism. We used to rip our shirt open and have the big J there, and it stood for all of that. It seems those days are gone. They're not. You are especially those of you that are younger, you have the baton is passed to you with this. Don't let the discouragement of what journalism, which is not really journalism anymore, have evolved into. This is probably one of the most untold stories in America right now. The headline is the dissolution of the republic, the transformation of America from what it was to what it is looking like it's becoming, and we are in that gap right now as one civilization passes away and whatever this other nightmare of a civilization is going to come in and take its place. That is being aided and abetted with the use of taxpayer dollars. If you are a member of the Fourth Estate, as we say, you have a duty to report and be a watchdog of government and how those government funds are being used and misused. That is your chief duty. The only job profession in the entire Constitution is reporters. There's a reason that job is protected the way it is because you have a sacred obligation to report the truth of something, not spin it, twist it, and whatever. These are 4 experts up here that are going to be available. Well, one of them obviously is left, but Trevor is available for you for future comments if you want to give him a call. But they're available to you. These guys are well studied in all of their professions. They know what they're talking about. It's our obligation as this coalition to bring them to you so that you can do your jobs as journalists. And I feel you. I know you. I've lived in your shoes. I walked in your shoes. To some degree, I still do. So please execute your duty. You have a duty to do what is involved in your work, which is an obligation to report the truth. So I'd like to wrap up and tell everybody thank you, both online, thousands of you apparently I've been told, so thank you. Those of you who showed up, those of you who came to the rally, and we will be available obviously for all sorts of questions and everything, not just today, but moving forward there will also be a recorded version of just the press conference that will be available to you. I believe we're going to be putting that out either tomorrow or Saturday. Trey Brock, who's handling the media, our producer handling the media, will be in touch with you on when that will be available in case you needed a record of it. I think that concludes all of our housekeeping business with regard to the press conference. We're going to throw it back now to the studio in Detroit and let them resume coverage. For all of you here and watching online for the press conference, thank you. Those of you online, stick around. We still have about 20-25 minutes to go. Thank you very much.
And there you have it, the press conference wrapping up there with the closing remarks from Michael Voris. Simon, anything hit you off the top of your head, the takeaways from the 4 speakers they had at the press conference and the points that they had to make?
Yeah, I think, look, these are similar points to the ones that we've been making on the download for, well, kind of almost as long as we've been doing the download, but particularly over the last week or two, we've been making these points on a number of episodes of the download. I know also we've been making these points on things like the Vortex and various other news articles and so forth. And I think it's very important to consider that for the audience watching at home, for the Church Militant audience, and obviously I've just been told that we're also on a bunch of other coalition member people, so hello everyone there, it's good to see you. Or be seen. But these are points that they've heard. And those individuals who are watching may be thinking, well, come on, why go all the way to Washington? Or why do all this song and dance, this dog and pony show and what have you in there at the National Press Club? Well, of course, the important thing is it's the National Press Club, and we've got a bunch of press there. That we didn't just say, hey, let's get this with a bunch of Catholic organizations and that sort of stuff. And we're not just got these religious people hearing this. This is going to the national secular press, and we're going to put it out there. Now, possibly, obviously, what's MSNBC going to do with this? What's CBS going to do with this? Well, at best, they're going to bury it. At worst, they're going to come along and do some kind of, denigrate it and try to make fun of it and so forth. But there are other organizations out there, and we all know them, the more right-wing organizations, the more conservative organizations, the organizations who are concerned with the American experiment, concerned with the American Republic. Those are the organizations who will pick up on this, and they don't know about all this stuff going on with the bishops. For our audience at home who remember our election coverage and our expert that we had, Jim Ellis, who is so deep in politics, that I don't think he'll ever find his way out, very deeply connected with politics, he didn't know that the bishops got immigration money to do all this stuff. He didn't know. And he's like hip deep in Washington at the very least.
$3 billion through Catholic organizations since 2008.
So obviously these are people who don't know it. This is sudden information that people are like, wow, there is, as Michael Voris said, you know, his great little soundbite that's going to be repeated all over the place. It's going to be the bishops are the greatest enemies of the Republic that it doesn't know it has. Anyway, I've just been told that we have Christine ready for us, and I think Christine said that she actually had some interviews to go with. Christine, how are you?
Doing great. Really enjoyed this press conference. Some great questions I actually have with me. One of our speakers, Sheena Davidson, who Alliance for Safe Texas. I'm so sorry, Sheena Rodriguez. Yes. You know, I heard you say $3 billion. That's how much the U.S. bishops and Catholic charities have gotten over the course of 15 years just for their migration services. And Sheena has a lot to say about how the U.S. bishops are in the Catholic charities as well, are complicit in child sex trafficking. So could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I think that one of the main things that I want people to understand is that right now, because I testified in front of Congress about the 85,000 and in my experience down along the border and telling, testifying about what the children were telling me. I spoke a little bit about that today too. But with the 85,000 missing children, and that's not new, unfortunately. Like I said, that's not anything new. A lot of the vetting of these sponsors that people are hearing about is actually done by the NGOs. And so one of the things is that I mentioned about having to unfortunately go toe-to-toe in Texas, in Austin, with regards to a lot of legislation, border security related legislation there in the state, but at the same point in time, since this news has really kind of hit the ground with the missing children, I have yet to see any of these NGOs stepping forward into the limelight saying these are the measures that we're going to be taking as NGOs to ensure that we are properly vetting, to speak out against this. If anything, they're advocating for faster turnaround, which I touched upon that today as well. And it's that faster turnaround also where a lot of this stuff can slip through the cracks because there's so many people flooding the border right now under this unprecedented border crisis that it's hard to keep up with them, and you cannot humanly verify so many. And so, but that's the other thing is that I want to make people aware. Hold these NGOs and ask them, what are you doing? What are you doing? Those that are operating in their local states, asking meet with them, meet with your Catholic charities, meet, with the, because there's Lutheran services. There's several, every denomination has them. Ask them what they are actively doing to help combat the known trafficking cases of these unaccompanied minors coming through.
Yeah, that is so key. You mentioned whistleblowers testifying for Congress. Just last month, I actually interviewed Tara Lee Rodas, who's one of these whistleblowers, and it was absolutely disturbing to hear what she said. That, and she reported these incidents of violations where these unaccompanied minors are being placed in the hands of unvetted sponsors, and some of them turn out to be criminals, MS-13, and these poor children are being exploited either for labor or for sex. And we know that Project Veritas did a sting last November confirming that this is happening. I mean, this is so disturbing. What can we do about this?
And that's exactly it. People, we need to get active on our local levels and in our state levels. People are always asking. That's why I started Alliance for a Safe Texas, was because when people, even right there in Texas, were recognizing how bad things really were, when you hear what's happening, you're then, well, what can I do about it, right? Well, I'm just a mom. That's it. I'm just a mom, but I'm also the daughter of our living God. And so when we know that there's a problem, we need to find ways to get active and engaged. So find out, go and become a citizen lobbyist, if you will, and I'm an unpaid lobbyist, out there in your state capitals. Look and see how much money is being allocated, even from your city levels, to Catholic charities or some of these NGOs. And then again, ask them those hard, uncomfortable questions. It's not about attacking, right? It's not about pointing, fingers. It is about saying you're receiving all of this money. Where is it going? How is it being allocated? How is it being used? And then we know that this is a very real issue. It's a verifiable issue with the trafficking of the children. What is Catholic charities? What is, fill in the blank. What are you guys doing on your side to actively help to fight against, to combat this? Get involved. Get involved.
The film Sound of Freedom is now approaching $100 million. It's been a huge hit, unexpected hit. Do you think that this film is going to help, highlight this problem of child trafficking?
I hope so, because I think the other thing is, too, is that there's been other movies about trafficking in the past as well, and a lot of the times with some of the movies, it still remains a distant problem. This is not just an issue in Colombia. This is not just an issue overseas. This is literally happening right in our neighborhoods. And I actually just recently wrote a Substack. People can visit securetheboarder.us, securetheboarder.us, and see some of the stats right there from Texas. Not just, again, it's not just the unaccompanied minors issue. It's also within the, how many children within the foster care system are being, unfortunately, they're going back into trafficking. This is very real, and then take action again right there. And people always ask me too, what can you do? What's a good organization to support? Support and advocate for your local sheriff's offices, for your local PDs. Make sure that they have funding, because oftentimes if their funding is decreased, the trafficking division is one of the first ones to go, right? Go reach out and find out what local groups there, anti-trafficking groups are in your area. Support them, volunteer. Everybody has a something that they can do right there in their local communities. So I really appreciate you bringing and highlighting this issue.
Thank you so much, Sheena Rodriguez, Alliance for Safe Texas. As she said, get involved. Anyone could do it. We should all get more involved. All right, thank you so much, Sheena.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. God bless.
God bless you. All right, I think we have a few other people that we want to speak with. All right, we have a former federal judge. He's coming. He was one of our speakers. His name is William Wagner. He actually provided analysis on the terrifying, very disturbing Michigan hate speech law.
Yeah.
He did some very. He actually provided testimony before Congress about this. So we have him coming over here right now. Hello, Mr. Wagner. Very
good to see you again.
Sure. So we're live with the desk in Detroit, and just wanted to talk to you about. You did some great analysis on this Michigan hate speech law. In a nutshell, why should people of faith be very concerned about this?
Well, you can be absolutely assured that if this proposed bill becomes law, that it will be weaponized against people of faith. It will be weaponized to try to keep ideas that are grounded in the sacred, to not have those ideas become part of the marketplace of ideas. And we know this because everywhere in the world that laws like this have been passed, that's where the government inevitably goes and how they use these laws. Now, to be fair, these laws are unconstitutional as to everybody. They could be used against the left just as easily as they could be used against people of faith. The problem is that usually it's governments that disagree with ideas grounded in the sacred that use these laws to suppress those ideas. And the way that they do that in this proposed law in Michigan is very scary, because they make it a felony. And they make it a felony that puts you in prison. Then they allow for a civil cause of action that can literally, take away anything that you've saved for your whole lifetime. And so, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Our framers, set up a constitution where we only give a certain amount of power to government, and then we say, in addition to that, we're going to limit the exercise of that power by not allowing you to interfere with freedom of expression, by not allowing you to interfere with religious conscience. And when government uses their power to suppress religious ideas, what they're doing is something that is, it just goes to the heart of it breaks my heart, because it was people that had sacred ideas that ended slavery in this country. When you allow those ideas to be part of the marketplace of ideas, we learn to love our neighbor as ourselves. We learn to be fair. We learn not to lie. We learn not to steal. And so these are not ideas that are dangerous. They are ideas that actually give a that give a foundation of morality and a foundation of truth to a nation. And that foundation allows for good governance. It allows for the rule of law. And that's what this nation was built on. I hope we don't go to another kind of governance.
You said something that really surprised me. I wasn't aware of during your talk that the Michigan Catholic Conference, you thought that they would take a position against this proposed law, and they didn't take a position.
Well, I thought that, all groups of faith would have shown up, at this hearing, ready to testify, against it because, when you write a law so vaguely, you allow for arbitrary enforcement by government. And again, history shows that arbitrary enforcement usually comes against, people that have ideas grounded in the sacred. And again, those groups weren't there, including the Catholic.
Yeah, that's what's so frustrating to us because, we're Catholic and we believe that the bishops really should be the sentinels. They're the ones standing guard saying, you shall not pass, fighting on our behalf. And yet, in too many cases, it seems they're just kind of letting it all in and not doing enough. But let me ask you, because we were talking over dinner last night, you were involved in the Colorado law that's very similar to this hate speech law. You said it was struck down. Do you think the Michigan hate law will eventually be struck down?
If the Michigan law is passed as it's written, it will be struck down. And I don't want to get deep in the weeds here on live TV, but there are three reasons it's going to be struck down. It's written so vaguely and ambiguously that no normal person is going to be able to read it and see what is a crime. That violates constitutional due process because it doesn't give notice to a person of what is criminal. It puts the onus on the listener to determine whether or not felony criminal behavior has occurred, as opposed to what the intent of the speaker is. And so you have to have a notice to a person of what is criminal under our due process clause. And, when you utter something and it's only determined later that that's criminal based on the feelings of the person that's listening, you don't give the person that's speaking the opportunity to decide whether or not to engage in proper or illegal activity. So those are two big reasons it'll be struck down. It's also going to be struck down because it regulates speech based on very specific viewpoints and topics. And the Supreme Court has clearly said that the First Amendment has a limit on the exercise of government power, and that biggest limit is that government can't use its power to regulate the viewpoint or a topic, and that's what this law does.
It's just a mess. All right, well, thank you so much. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for being part of this.
Good to be here.
God bless you.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. And then we do have another person to speak to. William, we're going to speak to Zoe Warren. He was the Second Amendment activist. Here he comes. Hello, Mr. Warren. How are you?
How are you?
Second Amendment activist. I enjoyed your talk. I wanted to ask you because you quoted one of the cardinals, one of the more liberal cardinals, saying that we should just hand over our guns to protect the weak. What is wrong with that statement?
Well, I mean, obviously he's never been to Alaska or Maine, because in Maine you can get devoured by giant wild cats if you're not armed. So voluntarily giving up your arms in Maine is not going to happen. Especially in Alaska, bears will come out of the woods and eat you. So I think it's lunacy, the idea that you should voluntarily give up your rights. I have a right to bodily autonomy, right? Well, just because somebody wants to rape me and I should give up my right to do that, to make sure they don't go rape other people? No. The way that you help the vulnerable, the way that you help the weak, is by empowering them. Like, you ruin a woman's ability to protect herself if you create long background check time frames. Because if her husband says, on Friday night, I'm going to kill you when I get out of jail, and she puts him in jail, if she doesn't have a firearm by Monday to protect her and her children, he could get out of jail and kill her. If she's got to wait 3 business days, it'll be Wednesday. So we need to be thinking what makes sense. What makes sense is that's why our founders said it very clearly. There is no security for a free people without a trained, armed community. And that's what the Second Amendment really says.
Right. I thought you made a very interesting point that I think a lot of people approach this right to bear arms as this is something the government is giving us. But you brought up the point that no, this is a God-given right.
That's right. God gave us our right to keep and bear arms. Even Jesus, he didn't tell them to give their their firearm, their gun, their sword to Caesar. He said, put it away. I mean, you still own it. Just put it back right now. I have to go do this. You've already fought me. I said I had to go this is going to happen to me. You told me it wouldn't. I told you, get behind me, Satan. I still have to go do this. Now you're cutting people's ears off. Put your sword away. Okay? It wasn't about not having one. Who better than the just people, you know? I could not imagine being in a place like, China and just having people who do not believe in God as the only people who can carry arms. What kind of America would that be? That's what they want. That's what they're trying to create.
Well, we only have about a minute left, but is it disturbing that the media, every time they highlight gun violence, it's always being used to kill people, like homicides? But isn't it the case that the vast majority of times when people are using guns, it's really to defend themselves and to protect their families?
That's right. I mean, and it's really difficult to prove a negative. It's if nothing happens and nothing gets reported, then you obviously don't know about it. If something does happen and nothing gets reported, you still don't know about it. And so to prove how much defensive uses prevent violence is a difficult metric. However, it's my opinion, and I believe that's why the founders wrote what they wrote, an armed and trained community is the safest. If everyone's armed and trained, again, the place with the most drugs, money, and guns at one time in one place is never robbed. It's the police evidence room. It's because it's surrounded by people who have guns, they're trained to use them, and they will use them. That's what we should have in our communities. Our neighborhoods should be safe places. If you want a safe place, okay, get everybody armed and trained.
Thank you so much. Great to see you. Thanks so much for being part of this. All right. Yep. So today, great speakers, great assembly, great turnout as well.
Thank you very much, Christine. Wonderful.
Yeah, so a wonderful event, I think, that we had there today. Like I said, I think it's absolutely wonderful that these statements are being made and being made now out to the secular world. They're being made out there to people who wouldn't necessarily have heard them. Obviously, a lot of what is being said there is not necessarily new to the audience that it's going to be going to because of these conservative, these right-wing organizations. But I think it's very important that you come along and you say, hey, these things, these constitutional, Republican, and Republican not in the sense of the party, but the Republican in the sense of the American Republic, these Republican principles, very, very important. They're under attack from the leftists, and everyone's going to go, yeah, we know this, yawn. Okay, some of these leftists are the Catholic bishops, and it's going to be like, record scratch? What's that about? And they're going to want to know that information. That's very, very important, I think, because there's this idea out there that because, the Catholic Church opposes abortion, they immediately assume, oh, the Catholic Church is just 100% aligned with conservative principles. And it's like, well, the Catholic bishops are not really opposing abortion terribly much. There's always been kind of this problem with the pro-life thing, but they are certainly not in lockstep with Republican in terms of the party positions. They're in terms of Democratic in terms of the party positions.
I think we have to remind the audience, too, and we're talking about defund the bishops, a very loose statement to talk about the USCCB, the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, and really there, we're not even talking about many bishops. No. That was something that was really mind-blowing to me, is all the Democratic affiliated workers in this huge bureaucracy making all the decisions on how to, move 85,000 missing children around that they can't account for. Well, you're probably not doing a very good job there.
It's like the swamp. We talk about like the swamp in D.C. Obviously, they were in D.C. and you talk about the political swamp, that permanent class of civil servants who are not elected officials. And many of these people, these permanent class of civil servants within the USCCB, these are not bishops. They're not necessarily men of faith. They are just, people who've come along.
And that's when we say USCCB, we're talking about that whole bureaucracy itself. Yeah. And I guess if there's one takeaway today, Bishop Sheen said, it's up to laity to make sure your bishops act like bishops. Well, ask them to talk to these people that are working at the USCCB. Where's the 85,000 kids? Why are we doing this? Number two, why are they absent at the hearings in Michigan here on free speech, for crying out loud? And, God-given rights need to be enforced, and they need to be asking questions. Well, that was a wonderful day that we had here today. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus, exules filii Heve. A te suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra,
y los tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you very much for joining us. This ends our coverage of our special press conference in D.C. and prayer rally. Please pray for the bishops that they do the right thing and get involved. God bless you.